I take this time to share with my colleagues a report that I released yesterday, which is the product of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The report's called Putin's Asymmetric Assault on Democracy in Russia and Europe, Implications for U.S. National Security. I commissioned this report to be done early in 2017. I had to make a decision on the allocation of resources. And I thought that it was extremely important that the American people and the international community understand the breadth of Russia's campaign against democratic institutions. Yes, we saw it in 2016 in the U.S. elections, but that was only one part of a much broader design. And that I recognized that we needed to devote the resources at that time in order to make this report work. It is how Russia has interfered not just here in the United States, but in Europe. I want to start by acknowledging some of the staff. And Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent that floor privileges be granted to Laurie Carey, who is a fellow on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee staff on loan from the State Department during today's session of the Senate.
Without objection.
I want to start with the statement that this is not a partisan report. Yes, I commissioned it as the Democratic ranking member because decisions had to be made early in 2017 on the allocation of resources. As I know the presiding officer knows, I worked very closely with Senator Corker on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And throughout the development of this report, I've kept Senator Corker informed, and the work of this report has relied upon the work of many members of the United States Senate on both sides of the aisle. And in fact, I think the presiding officer will recall the work that we did, Democrats and Republicans, in the passing of legislation in 2017 that held Russia accountable for its maligned activities. I was proud that I had the strong cooperation, support, and leadership in developing that legislation from Senator McCain, Senator Graham, and Senator Rubio, who contributed greatly to the enactment of that legislation. And on the Democratic side, Senator Menendez, Senator Shaheen, and Senator Durbin. This report is accumulation of a year's work. It had the professionalism and dedication and patriotism of the very talented staff at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And I want to acknowledge that because I know all of us recognize that our staffs are critically important to the work we do here in the United States Senate. Damian Murphy was our captain on this project. He was the one who provided the leadership to make sure that we had a thorough report, that we had an accurate report, and that our recommendations would be tailored to make our nation more secure. Terrell Henry provided incredible help throughout the entire year. Laura Carey was an instrumental part of getting this done. Megan Barkley helped us with making sure that all of the sources were properly cited. I also want to acknowledge my Democratic staff leader, Jessica Lewis, who really was the one who decided early that we could get this done and encouraged me to move forward. And lastly, Mr. President, this report has received considerable attention since I released it yesterday. Considerable attention because this is the first comprehensive report that's been authored that deals with Russia's maligned activities, which are global in nature. And Sean Bartlett was capable of making sure that this story would be heard. And I thank him for his professional work in the way that we were able to get this report circulated. Following the 2016 elections, I thought it was important that we shed more light on Russian government's efforts to interfere in democracies beyond our own. For anyone who thinks that the threat posed by Russia is limited to hacking emails or the American election in 2016 are missing the real story. And that's what this report shows. We wanted to describe the scale and scope of this threat to make the American people aware that the Russian government's interference in the 2016 elections is part of a pattern of behavior and warn that Russia could attack again in 2018 and 2020. The Kremlin is a learning organization, and they are constantly perfecting and improving their techniques. This report is the first government report to lay out in detail exactly how the Russians operate. Mr. Putin employs an asymmetric arsenal that includes not just military invasions, and they do use their military, but cyber attacks, disinformation and propaganda, support for fringe political groups. They have employed the weaponization of energy resources. They have a network of organized crime, and they have a system that is fueled by corruption. This threat existed long before President Trump and will remain following his tenure unless he takes steps and we take steps to address it. Our report examines how the Russian government has sought to interfere in 19 countries across Europe. Many lessons are to be learned from our allies in Europe, who have shown that his behavior can be deterred. While many in the executive branch understand the threat and have taken steps to address Mr. Putin's asymmetric arsenal, presidential leadership has been absent. Never before has a U.S. president so clearly ignored such a grave and growing threat to our national security. And without presidential leadership, the U.S. will remain uncoordinated in its response. The Washington Post reported in December that the National Security Council has not had a meeting on countering malign Russian influence, more than a year after the intelligence community assessment that Russia interfered in our elections. Mr. Putin rise to power in 1999 was cynical and opportunist. He capitalized on a war in Chechnya and apartment bombings in Moscow to shore up his image as a strong hand that could steady the country after the rocky 1990s. To do so, this former KGB officer emboldened his security services to play an outsized criminal role in running the state. Mr. Putin's regime used violence to stop those who opposed him in and outside of Russia, cheated his way through the Olympics, and through his security services connections with organized crime and money laundering, has emboldened cyber theft and racketeering that has real-world implications for U.S. companies and citizens. Mr. Putin developed his techniques first at home, against his own people. In Russia, he represented independent civil society, journalists, and political opposition, while manipulating cultural and religious influences, the media and information space, and corrupt crony capitalist system to shore up his own regime. The tools in Mr. Putin's asymmetric arsenal are drawn from the Soviet playbook, but updated with new technologies. These include propaganda and disinformation, cultivating political fringe, religious and cultural groups as influencers, and weaponizing crime and corruption as a system of government. In Europe, Mr. Putin's Russia has invaded countries, attempted coups, cut off countries from energy in the middle of the winter, temporarily crippling governments with cyber attacks, created a whole new way to exponentially spread fake news using bots and trolls, and used dirty money as a weapon to attempt to buy candidates and political parties. The report illustrates these events in more detail in the 19 countries across Europe. The international response to the Kremlin's arsenal has been a patchwork. Some European countries have shored up their democracies in ways the U.S. has yet to do in a strategic whole-of-government fashion. Europe's experience with Russia's meddling shows that it can be deterred, and the U.S. must take steps to deter Russia now, as laid out in the report's recommendations. The report helps us understand why Mr. Putin is doing this. He's doing this, Mr. President, because that's all he has. Russia's economy is faltering. It has a limited military capacity. It doesn't have many friends around the world. Its economy is about 7% the size of the U.S. economy. It ranks number 12 in the world. It's smaller than Italy or South Korea or Canada. But we have to acknowledge he's had success with the use of these tools, with the use of these weapons. He's accumulated, by reported sources, more than tens of billions of dollars of stolen wealth. He has a propaganda machine that has been able to make him popular at home and accomplish many of his objectives in other countries. He has slowed down Serbia's integration into EU and Ukraine and Georgia's ability to join NATO because of Russia's troops located in its countries. The report highlights the lessons that we've learned from our Europeans. It's interesting, the Europeans understood this risk before we did and took action. Brexit campaign in UK. Russia was clearly engaged in it. Prime Minister May has made a resolute public statements that Russia's meddling is unacceptable and will be countered. In France, France looked at what happened in 2016 in the US elections and they took steps. The Macron campaign was subject to cyber attacks with emails from President Macron during the campaign. It was released shortly before the runoff elections. But France was prepared, and they were able to counter that. The French government worked with independent media and political parties to expose and blunt the dissemination of fake news. In Germany, we saw the famous Lisa case that was fabricated by Russia-sponsored news outlets in order to incite the Russian-German community for an anti-migrant type protest. The German government bolstered democratic cybersecurity capabilities, particularly after the 2015 hack of the Bundestag. And the Interior Minister proposed creating a center of defense against misinformation. Germany has acted. In the Nordic countries, the states have largely adopted a whole society approach with an emphasis on education that teaches critical thinking and media literacy. They have a curriculum in their school for their school children to be able to differentiate between what is real and what is fake in the news. In Lithuania, the government diversified its supplies of natural gas, and all the Baltic governments have worked to integrate their electricity grids to reduce dependency on Russia for energy needs. In Spain, the Spanish government has investigated, exposed, and cut off significant money laundering operations by Russia-based organized crime. So what do we do about this? Russia has this plan to compromise our democratic institutions. What do we do about it? Well, the report spells out many, many recommendations, and I'm proud to say that many of these recommendations have been championed by members on both sides of the aisle. First, we call upon presidential leadership. We need President Trump to acknowledge the threat, establish a high-level interagency fusion cell to coordinate all elements of U.S. policy on the Russian government's maligned influence operations. The president should present to Congress a comprehensive national strategy and work to get it implemented and funded. Number two, the United States government needs to support democratic institution building and values abroad. We need a stronger support for these programs. The U.S. should provide assistance to help bolster democratic institutions in European states. Members in the United States Congress should conduct hearings and use their platform to make democracy and human rights a central part of their agenda. I am proud of the work that we've done on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Working with Senator Corker, we have highlighted human rights throughout the year, but we need to do more. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee has recommended to the full Senate that we pass legislation so we would start evaluating every country and their ability to fight corruption. It's patterned after the Trafficking in Persons report on human trafficking. We need to get that bill enacted into law. Third, we need to expose and freeze Kremlin-linked dirty money. We should declassify any intelligence related to Mr. Putin's personal corruption and cut off Mr. Putin and his inner circle from the international financial system. Mr. President, we know that the elite class in Russia do not want to hold their money in rubles. They want dollars. We've got to deny them that opportunity. And by the way, they also like visas to visit the United States. They don't want to be stuck in Russia. Those sanctions have an impact, and we need to make sure that they're enforced. And fourth, we need to create state hybrid threat actors designation and impose sanction regime. The United States should designate countries that employ malign influence operations to assault democracies as state hybrid threat actors. Those designated would fall under a preemptive and escalating sanctions regime that would be applied whenever the state uses weapons like cyber attack to interfere with a democratic election or disrupt a country's vital infrastructure. We need to make it clear that, yes, we want relations with all countries, constructive relations. But if they're going to use these weapons against our democratic institutions, we need to be prepared to increase our sanctions against these countries. Quite frankly, Mr. President, we must understand that the importance of democracies against what Mr. Putin is trying to do. We got to defend the United States and Europe against foreign funding that erodes democracy. We need to pass legislation to require full disclosure of shell companies, owners, and improve transparency for funding of political parties, campaigns, and advocacy groups. We have bipartisan legislation to do that. Let's get that passed so that shell companies, we know that they're shielding illegal funds. Let's make sure that Russia's game plan is not funded through shell companies that are located here. We need, number 6, U.S. leadership to build global cyber defenses and norms. Establish a rapid reaction team to defend allies under attack. Mr. President, we should push NATO to consider the implications of a cyber attack within the context of Article 5 and our ability to defend each other. We should also lead an effort to establish an international treaty on the use of cyber tools in peacetime, modeled on the international arms control treaties. And then lastly, we need to hold social media companies accountable. Government should mandate transparency for funding political advertisements. This is the new way of communications. We got to catch up with technology on our laws. You know, we require traditional advertisers to disclose all this information, but we've left the social media alone because we didn't know about it when we passed these laws. We got to make sure that we have full laws on disclosure. Companies should conduct audits on possible Kremlin-supported meddling in European elections over the past several years. Companies should establish civil society advisory councils and work with civil societies and government to promote media literacy. Mr. President, that's just a sampling of some of the recommendations that are in this report. It's pretty comprehensive, but it does give us, I think, a game plan to understand that we can protect our national security, and we must. Following the end of World War II, the United States led the world in constructing the liberal international order, underpinned by democratic institutions, shared values, and accepted norms. It protects our shared security, advances our interests, and expands our prosperity. Yet the defense of that system of institutions and democratic principles is an anathema to Mr. Putin, who seeks to protect little more than his power and wealth. It's therefore up to the United States and our allies to engage in a coordinated effort to counter the Kremlin's assault on democracy in Europe, the United States, and around the world. In closing, we must take care to point out that there is a distinction between Mr. Putin's corrupt regime and the people of Russia, who have been some of his most frequent victims. Many Russian citizens strive for a more transparent, accountable government that operates under the democratic rule of law. And we hold hope for better relations in the future with a Russian government that reflects these values. We applaud the courage that we saw very recently from the protesters in Russia who stood up against Mr. Putin because they want basic freedom in their country. I remember very clearly that when we passed the Magnitsky Law that holds those who have violated basic human rights in Russia against Sergei Magnitsky, who was just doing his job as a lawyer, that they would be denied our banking system and denied the ability to travel to this country. When that bill was enacted, it was the people that were protesting against their government that said that law passed by the United States Congress was the most pro-Russian bill passed by the United States Congress. We stand with the people of Russia. I also am the ranking Democrat on the U.S. Helsinki Commission. I've worked on the Helsinki Commission for a long time. The Helsinki Commission includes all the countries of Europe and the former Soviet Union, United States and Canada. All countries have signed on to the Helsinki Final Act that talks about basic democratic principles. And it gives each member state the right to challenge the activities in every other member state. We have an obligation to call out what Mr. Putin is doing, because it's not only against our national security interests, it's not only hurting the people of Russia, it's against the commitments Russia made in the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. The United States must work with our allies to build defenses against Mr. Putin's asymmetric arsenal and strengthen international norms and values to deter such malign behavior by Russia or any other country. I stand ready to work with all my colleagues to protect our national security interests, to recognize the threat that Mr. Putin poses to our democratic institutions, to look forward to a day when we can truly have a better relationship with Russia because they will stop this assault on democratic institutions in Europe, the United States, or anywhere in the world. Mr. President, I yield the floor.